to GONKCAST, a long-form discussion podcast about the music of English electronic duo Autechre, album by album, EP by EP. I'm Gabe.
I'm Dan.
And this is a deep dive into Set C of Autechre's ever-expanding and soon-to-grow even bigger 2022 project. That covers recorded performances in Sydney, Dublin, Brussels, Paris, Rennes, Barcelona, Madrid, and Krems for those following along at home. Don't forget that we've launched a Patreon where for just $5 a month, you'll get bi-weekly bonus episodes on AE adjacent music, plus the opportunity to vote on future bonus episode topics. Last week, for example, our subscribers decided we should do an episode on the new Autechre's Point Never album, Tranquilizer. That was fun, wasn't it, Dan?
Yeah, maybe not. Listen to the episode, you'll see.
Dan was a little lukewarm. I was a little warmer, but not like fully won over. You know, moments of brilliance. And weirdly, I feel like our listeners were pretty divided on it as well. Yeah. But definitely an interesting discussion all the same. So be sure to head over to patreon.com/GONKCAST and join us. Shout out, by the way, to our newest subscribers this week, Douglas, Eddie, Secret Flowers Infinite, and Ed. Next time, we're thinking of doing something a little different. I say that as if we've been doing this new subscription model for more than a couple weeks. But anyway, we're going to count down our favorite albums of 2025. Feels like high time to do that. And we want to invite everyone to write in with your favorite album of the year, too. I think we'd all appreciate hearing what other Autechre obsessives have been into lately. So write us gonkcastpod@gmail.com. After that, we're going to take another week off for Christmas travel. Annoying, I know. We really picked a great time to relaunch the pod, like right in the holidays. But then we'll be back to Autechre with Set D of 2022 So send us your thoughts on that. Again, gonkcastpod@gmail.com. I like to kind of kick things off with some corrections, leftovers from last time, news if there is any. And this week there actually is a lot of news. So I'm sure everybody has seen, but Autechre have announced new tour dates for fall 2026. Quite a lot of them, 24 shows across the EU and UK in September and October. There are also, I forgot about this, but 2 Japan dates coming up in February. So what do you think, Dan? I mean, it feels like the 2022 project is going to continue, right?
Yeah, obviously like everybody else wondering if it'll be the Set E that we saw in North America, or if it'll be a whole, new thing or a mix of the two or what. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, and I think we even got a message about this a little later on from a listener, but we were sort of speculating, like, what if this is the end of the project? Because the set that we saw was so climactic feeling, and they, like, sort of contrary to practice that they've been doing so far on this project, they didn't really like preview what the next thing would be anywhere on this tour. They just played the same set like over and over and over again, right? So it's like, I don't know. I mean, it just felt like maybe this was the end, but to me, this more or less confirms that it's not going to be. I bet anything they're going to start off with like a whole new continuation or set.
Yeah, I would imagine, playing 24 shows of the same set would get kind of monotonous anyway, so just out of sheer need.
Well, in related news, and by the way, I hope you guys got your tickets because, this is like, we're so late. I'm sure they're all sold out by now, but I hope you guys know. And by the way, I hope you guys are going to go and write to us about exactly what you saw and what went down, because I'll really be looking forward to that. But yeah, related news, over on Mastodon, Sean confirmed that work has started on preparing the next batch of 2022 soundboards for release. When asked what's chances new AE being in the Christmas stocking, Sean replied, "Prob not, but I'm on it, ready when it's ready. Also takes Ian a bit to do the art, and that happens after, so we're prob looking at sometime next year." What do you think of that, Dan?
I mean, the sooner the better. I wonder, I was thinking about that, like, how much, do they do after? Is there any editing? Is there, is it just mastering, cleaning things up? What,
Seems
doing
like,
overdubs?
Try to keep it, I doubt they're doing any overdubs. I think they try to keep it pretty minimal, but definitely when they released that Helsinki recording early, like after the show kind of went wrong in the sound system, that was unmastered. So we know that they do a little post-processing, but I bet that's the easiest part. I don't know. Like, I just wonder, how do they decide? It seems like they always leave out just a couple of dates, and sometimes it feels like it makes sense. Like these were festival dates. Maybe they were a little shorter or not the full thing or something. But other times they just leave some out, and it's going to be heartbreaking to see. Like, I don't know. Do you think we're going to get every single one from the tour, or do you think a couple are going to get cut?
I don't know. In the 2015, I think, didn't all the North America get released?
They did. They just went ahead and did all of them on that time.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's a different project, but it would just like really. I would be bummed if like the show we went to wasn't one of the ones released, And so if anything gets cut, somebody's going to feel that way. I don't know. I could see if there's nothing wrong with the recording itself, like just put it out.
Yeah, it's just crazy because there's so many shows on this 2025 stretch.
People that aren't like us and like the people listening probably just listen to like one or two, or if you went to a show, listen to that. I doubt most people are like listening to every single one of them. So I feel like in the digital age, if you're not going to make a physical release, who cares? Just release them all.
Yeah, I would hope so, but I mean, there's just so many that I just have a feeling that some are not going to make the cut for whatever reason.
I'm being optimistic.
Yeah, okay, I like that. I like that manifesting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other question I'm kind of wondering is like, do you think that any of these kind of unreleased 2024 shows will be present here? Or do you think they're going to just do 2025, like something like Riga or Copenhagen or something like that?
I mean, unless it was like, the reason they didn't release it was just, if they're, I don't know. I feel like probably not, I think if like they would have done it, they would have did it when they released all the other ones. But, maybe they've seen that people want them all. So, who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. I'm extremely excited. It's just funny because I think it was like last episode or whatever, somebody had asked, what are you guys gonna do when you catch up, or and you were like, I'm just hoping that it'll by magic like kind of line up by the time we finish. It might literally happen, right? I don't know. All right, next bit of news, smaller news though. Guitarist Shane Parrish, I don't know if everybody saw this. He's like an Athens kind of acoustic guitarist. He's announced a double LP, and by Athens, I should clarify Athens, Georgia for the international listeners. He has announced a double LP of solo acoustic renditions of assorted Autechre tracks, mostly from kind of earlier in their career, due out February 27th. It seemed to me like the kind of AE community and really like the experimental music community in general was very excited about this just because of the daunting task. I'm a big fan of Shane Parrish. His last album kind of had transcriptions of, I don't know, various interesting things. Like there's, a lot of like Charles Mingus on there. He's just like very talented at sort of converting what seems impossible into something for solo finger-picked acoustic guitar. So I'm very interested. He released a couple singles. What are you thinking, Dan? You excited?
Yeah, I hadn't ever listened to him before, but I'm certainly excited. I listened to the couple of singles that he put on Bandcamp. They sound awesome. It's just like an amazing thing to be able to do, So I'm pretty excited. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him. I don't know, maybe 2 years ago or something. He played with Bill Orcutt, who I love. And Bill Orcutt has this incredible record called like Music for Four Guitars, or just four guitars, and it's him like sort of overdubbing. In fact, I think what he did was he just overdubbed like various guitar tracks like over and over and over, and then he kind of picked his four favorites, and like that's the composition. And so basically Shane Parrish is the guy who he turned to like, if we wanted to perform this, like, could you transcribe it? Like, how could we and they kind of put it together for people and did really an incredible tour. Actually, there's also a live record if you want to listen to that tour, which is really good, with Shane on it. That's all the news. Weirdly eventful week for an Autechre podcast. A lot of news. And then just one little sort of catch-up thing I wanted to touch on. I wanted to throw this out here because it seems like it's going to start some shit, and I want to hear what other people think. But listener Joe wrote in with this hot take saying, people can at me all they want, but the fan naming of these tracks is one of the most annoying things I've ever heard. I totally get the need for having easily memorable names for different sections of the set, and I highly appreciate the people that have taken the time to go through and analyze all of the sets and map them out for dummy casuals like myself. I'd be fine with the names if they were totally ridiculous, like names of dogs, or based on some consistent system of letters and numbers, but it just feels like people are trying to actually name them the same way Autechre would, which is how you end up with cringe-inducing titles like Drain 3 silly, which I just can't take seriously. I don't spend much time on AE Reddit or Discord, but I was wondering if you guys know how the process of naming works. How have they gotten agreed on that some particular unofficial name is going to be the quote unquote official one that ends up on AE pages? So we kind of talked about our mixed feelings. I think probably everybody has mixed feelings about these fan invented names. I think personally here they are almost like necessary more than ever. And I actually appreciate that the person who's come up with them has not tried to like invent their own Autechre names, but just made little cheeky references to tracks that clearly kind of remind them, they're kind of reminded of. So that's how you end up with like Drain 3 or whatever. I find that a lot less egregious than like trying to think of a new name that Autechre might come up with. That I find almost too painfully cringe,
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, we're sort of in a hard place right now. Like to talk about these things, and I don't just mean me and you. Yeah. I mean, Autechre fans.
Yeah.
You sort of need something to refer it as. So I get that, but same way, like it's a little cringy. I think I agree with Joe. I think like just giving it numbers or something is maybe a little better, but whatever.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Joe, I'm pretty sure that the person who came up with this TTT edit, which again just picks, and actually they're not totally transparent about how they picked, but they seem to have just picked, I'm guessing, their favorite renditions of each track and sort of impressively seamlessly linked it all together into one continuous composition, which you can download for free. I put it in the show notes of last episode, but I'll put it in here again. The person who did this, their Reddit username is like Fefedalexis. And I think they just came up with these names, and people were so impressed by the work they put into this that they just have kind of stuck to a degree. But I don't blame anybody who isn't on board.
I was wondering today when I was on my walk, what does TTT even mean? Why is it?
That's a good ass question. I honestly don't know.
I was thinking about the show and everything, and I was like, hey, wait a second. I've never thought about it.
That's a good question. Maybe I don't know. Somebody write in if you know. Why is it called TTT Dash? I don't know why I never even thought to ask that. But all right, that's all the catch up. We ready to dive into the official thing, Dan?
Yeah. We've already discussed the first two installments of the 2022 Dash project, which Autechre toured around the world in 2022 and 2023. In the fall of 2023, Autechre debuted the next installment, now known as Set C, in Sydney and Dublin, then picked it back up for a series of European dates in April of 2024, including Brussels, Paris, Rennes, Barcelona, Madrid, and Krems, all of which have been officially released, but also The Hague and Lisbon, which have not been released. It was at this point that the guys started shifting into Set D, but they actually performed Set C a few more times in the fall of 2024 in Oslo, Stockholm, and Riga. These performances have not been released, but it's possible they could be included in those batch of soundboards Sean's working on now.
On that note, it's worth mentioning that the time period we're discussing today is the point at which this project takes on a whole new dimension, because the first batch of soundboards covering most of the Set A's and one Set B was released in August 2023, about the same time the first Set C performances took place. And the second batch was released in November 2024, about the same time the very last Set C performances were taking place. It's also late 2023 when Sean first clarified on Mastodon that the project had officially become one enormous composition the guys were just continuing to add onto. And it was late 2024 when he dropped the quote, "We could keep this project going for another 10 years. In other words, it's right about now that I think most people began to recognize the full scope of this project. And I think that's really important as we kind of break it down.
As always, we're indebted to aepages.org for our track divisions, as well as the TTT fan edit, which assigns helpful titles. We'll put links to both of those in the show notes of the episode. And for those following along at home, Set C starts on track 21, which is the fan name Coursign, and typically ends on track 35, aka Kata 7. However, several performances start a bit later at track 24, also known as Drain 3, and some cross into the typical start of Set D, but we'll get into all of that.
Yeah, so high-level thoughts. What do you think about Set C overall, Dan?
I mean, the whole time I was thinking, is this just recency bias, or are these the best ones? You know, like this is the one. The set C, I think, is the one that's like the easiest to get into, the most like fun, most danceable. Dare I say, most normal music sounding. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I love this set. I mean, I absolutely love it. I'm obsessed with it. I don't think either of the previous sets, set A or set B, I would put in my like upper echelon of Autechre in general. But this one, I think I very easily would. I was thinking it's the first set that, well, it has a kind of a great diversity of sounds. I think the other sets are a little bit more confined in that sense. And for that reason, it's like, I can't call it, I would call set B like the hip hop set, or, set A, like, I don't know, the really abstract kind of set or something. This one, I can't think of anything to call it other than set C, because it just feels so diverse and distinct. It's like, any easier, it wouldn't be any easier to call Confield anything than Confield. You know what I mean? Like, that's just what it is, right? So I kind of feel like this has a real identity. I also feel like it's the first set with a really legit progression. I mean, something I have kind of felt annoyed by is with set A and set B. I guess not annoyed, but just disappointed by it. Is like, it doesn't really feel like it's building anywhere or anything. It just feels like a series of tracks that they kind of move between. Like when they're done with one, they move on to the next one. It's got this sort of like lateral move. This one feels like it's constantly like building and moving. And something I have been missing so bad from set A and set B is it reaches a genuine climax with the very end here, Cat of Seven. Of course, in the previous AE Live incarnations, like the 2015 and then the the 1/6, those interestingly would kind of climax like, around like 2/3, and then the rest of it would be kind of come down or aftershock. I love that, but I kind of also love the fact that this just keeps building and building, I feel, and then just explodes at the end. And we'll talk about it, but I feel like Cat of Seven is extraordinary, like worth the price of admission here.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with all of that.
The other thing is that a lot of times listening to set A and set B, I found myself thinking of other artists here and there, like, oh, this reminds me of kind of very early electronic music. I don't know. This reminds me of Square Pusher. This reminds me of Future Sounds of London, like all that stuff, right? And there's maybe a little bit of that here, but for the first time I was just thinking like, I don't know, this is corny, but I was like, this just sounds like Autechre. I mean, I genuinely feel like this just sounds like something only they could make,
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, but to that point, I was thinking about it today, walking around, like they use these samples, in this set, and like some of them are very famous hip hop samples, but then it's so like recontextualized and things like it. They've taken something so like noteworthy and turned it on its head so much that they've like completely made it their own again, which is like, just masterful.
Yeah, and it's funny because there are parts of, like when you're listening to set B, a lot of people refer to this as the very hip hop sounding set, and it has a little bit, especially the kind of core scene, like that second half of set B section, that feels a little bit like genre exercise, like they challenge themselves to do like an Autechre version of hip hop, which honestly reminds me a little bit more of like the whole Guestcom MO than proper Autechre, even though it's fun. But here, I don't know if it's like a placebo effect or what, but even those parts of set C just felt like more refined to me. Like they didn't feel like a novelty or something. They just felt like they had almost been evolved into like more fully digested into the Autechre thing. You kind of get what I mean? Like I'm not struck by, oh, this sounds so weirdly hip hop. It just sounds like Autechre now.
No, totally. I think like I think this set, like while having like such diverse sounds and everything, like it's very like cohesive. It cohesively puts all that together, and so I think like those hip hop sounds and the scratching and everything like don't stick out as much, if that makes sense, but yeah, they fit their place in more, and it's not more. You don't feel like, oh, now they're scratching again, kind of thing. It just feels a part of it. Even like throughout the rest of the set, like there's all these like little vocal things that kind of come and go and everything, and I just feel like that's such a great move, to tie the whole thing together.
I know, it's 100%, and kind of leads me to like another thought I had, which, I was sort of reading this in the background just now, but it feels like this is kind of a turning point for the project. I think both for fans and I want to argue like for Autechre themselves. I think this is the part where it sort of became clear to us, but I bet finally became crystal clear to them as well what this thing was going to be, like that they were just going to keep going indefinitely. And it makes me wonder if like sets A and sets B, or set A and B, are kind of stuff that they had been composing and working on, weren't sure what they were going to do with it, and then started kind of putting it together into a live set. And they thought, hey, what if we just like made this into one juggernaut live set and kept going with it? And I think it's around set C that I think they're probably actually for the first time composing with this project in mind. You kind of get what I mean? And I think that's what makes it much more like, it makes it this kind of breakthrough moment for this project.
Yeah, I felt the same way as I was listening to this. I was kind of wondering, like we talked about it a bit in the other two episodes, but like, like set A and stuff, you even mentioned this a little bit ago, but like, it feels like a little bit more like nebulous and everything. And we talked about how like, well, if it's this giant, 6-hour thing, like it makes some sense for the intro to be an hour long. But here, like, I can't tell if it's like, is it just because now we're in the meat of this project as a whole, or is it, and I think it's more likely, what you just said, like they're sort of realizing like what this can be and what this is, and writing like with that in mind.
Yeah, that's totally how I feel. And it kind of raises the question, which is like, so does that mean that set A and set B are basically hearing them kind of working and getting here? You know what I mean? Like, this is the breakthrough, and it's so cool that we can go back and listen to them get here. Kind of the same way, like, I don't know, you can listen to, I don't know, live recordings of, John Coltrane before A Love Supreme, and maybe hear him like kind of getting there, gradually. That though feels like maybe unfair to sets A and B. What, like, are they just the hard road that pays off when we get to set C and beyond, or are you still feeling like they are, valuable in their own right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it too on the set B one. Like set B, I had an argument of like, is that even really like its own set? It sort of feels like a little bit of A, a little bit of C, and that's kind of what it ends up being. But yeah, I mean, I like set A and I like set B, very much. I think they stand up on their own. Like if set A was its own tour that got released as AE, whatever year, that 2022, and that was it. Start over again. We get 2023 set. Like, I think I'd be perfectly happy with that. But then, as I'm saying this, I think of how when we started this, we talked about how this 2022 whole package like kind of befuddled us, and we never really got like super into it until we like learned of this project. So like, I don't know, maybe I'm throwing a wrench in my own idea here, but like, maybe the whole is greater than the sum, or whatever the hell that I know. Cliche is.
Yeah, I couldn't help but wonder if like my advice probably would be, to anybody who feels overwhelmed, like start with set C. Yeah. It'll grab you immediately. It's fantastic. And then if you love it, which I almost guarantee you're gonna, if you're into this kind of music.
If you're listening this, yeah.
Yeah,
you're gonna.
Of course. Then go back to A and B to hear how we get there. Now, again, that feels unfortunate. That feels unfair to A and B, because I think they are great. They're just not transcendently great the way this is. But it also kind of got me wondering, like, well, let me read this email from listener Mitchell, who kind of like raises this question that I was also having. So Mitchell writes, set C is when 2022 - gets good. As a result, Autechre create their best work this decade, pure, unabashedly dance music. This is where I think they really started to tinker with the set as one large song. Always a good sign to have legible melodies and hooks back, especially from tracks 21 through 28, and even the drumline bit in 26. With the Mastodon demos, which we'll talk about, the AMKS mix, and the Ren blooper, their behind-the-scenes looks in their process for the sets. Mitchell raises a really interesting point here, which is that it does feel like, especially with set C, you get to hear some unfinished tinkering. Sydney, very interestingly, just kind of peters out. It doesn't reach the incredible climax of like full-blown Cat of Seven. It finishes, I just feel like, oh my God, what did the people at Sydney do to deserve this? That like, just as they're about to hear the greatest music ever, it just sort of falls apart. Dublin, the whole latter half of Dublin it feels like very much work in progress to me, like a blueprint for what it's going to be in the 2024 sets. Mitchell mentions that like Ren blooper. It's so interesting because Ren, I think, is a really cool set, but kind of around the middle, it just fucks up. Something stops working and it just kind of falls apart, and they like just restart that section. You wonder, like, all right, if you've got all these sets and you're listening back and you're deciding which ones you absolutely want to release, why are you releasing stuff that's like not done or had a blooper in it? It's like, is the whole point of this project actually to hear them working toward something? You kind of get what I'm asking. Like the whole time I've been thinking, okay, what this is a bunch of glimpses at different versions this could be. But listening to what a breakthrough set C is, now I find myself thinking, actually, it's like a documentary on progress,
Yeah, I mean, I think we've mentioned this before too, but I think it's like the Grateful Dead. Like you listen to all these shows, like that's where the real meat and potatoes is of that band, and like there's a lot of shows that suck. There's a lot of shows that are great, but like inside of those shows, there's fuck ups and mishaps and
True.
things that are bad, and like that kind of becomes like what is cool about it is like seeing the progression of like a song, how it becomes throughout the years and whatnot. And so like I kind of just feel like Grateful Dead is not a progression. It's like you wouldn't say like, the 1977 versions of this are like the true version. They finally found it. It's just like a different, incarnation of the thing. And you can't ever say which is the thing. I would have previously said that that's exactly what this is. And yet now I started thinking of it more like, I don't know, the Get Back Beatles documentary or something, where it's like actually a look at them in the workshop, like trying to reach something. Yeah, I get that, but like, if that's the case, are we going to get like the definitive, I say studio, but the whole thing we talked about with Sean last time, I think that only works if you get like that definitive cut, like you were talking about, like,
Perhaps,
you can listen to jazz or something and like hear a song being created, and then like you finally get that, it on wax, and that is the song, like if you never get like that definitive thing, I think that's what like skews more Grateful Dead to me, like they sort of do it backwards, where it's like, you get this record, which most of the time is kind of middling, and then like they take the, like that's the start of the song, and then they take those songs and create something else with them, and I feel like this is maybe a little closer to that, but we're not getting like that definitive version, which I don't know that in 2025 like is still a concept that like we need, like this may work,
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe even a better analogy, I don't know, it's a philosophical take, but a better analogy maybe would be something like the Coltrane Dolphy like Village Vanguard set, which is not them trying to like perfect it necessarily, but it feels like every night they're like trying to get somewhere, it's like that kind of impossible chasing the train, literally, like trying to get there, and there is no there, but what you're hearing is some people trying to find it, and maybe that's a little bit more what I'm leaning toward with this.
Yeah, I mean, and even to that point, like they do release it, and then I mean, think of my favorite things from Coltrane. He records that fairly early in his career, and then he's playing that until some of his last shows in totally different ways. It's like ever expanding, even though we do get that sort of definitive on wax version. So. I mean, I think there's precedent to allow Autechre to continue doing this.
Yeah, they're allowed. The last thing I wanted to kind of bring up, though, I've always got all these kind of high level things that I just want to get your take on, but is any part of you willing to say, because I think I am willing to say now, that the practice of releasing this as one long track is officially starting to piss me off? As the tracks reach like an hour and a half in length, like it gets so annoying where I don't always have a full uninterrupted hour and a half, even when I thought I did. And then because it's one continuous track, it's hard to just go back later and kind of pick up where you were. So I'm inevitably like just listening to the first half of these sets like over and over again. And in fact, it starts making me kind of lean toward the shorter sets. And in this case, the sets that start like a little bit later into it, like on track 24, because I want to get farther. I don't know. It was just here that it's like, I get that they want to force you to listen to the whole thing. It is one piece, but you get what I mean? Like the format here is starting to actually, and I worry about, the sets we saw, like the sets E, right? Mm-hmm. Almost all of those are an hour and a half, sometimes longer. It's like, it's getting unwieldy.
Yeah, no, I my own little personal problem, my like the walk I take almost every day takes about an hour and 5 minutes. And so like all the sets before this were pretty much like almost exactly my whole walk. These ones I would get home and it'd be, you got even a couple of them, you just have like 5 minutes left. And that's annoying. You want to just come in and take a shower or whatever. And then the ones that are, you just got 20 more minutes, like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go around the block a few more times or something, It was like fairly annoying. And then even, I do a lot of listening at work and like, yeah, I mean, there's never an hour and 20 minutes. I'm not having to pause. And I say tweet, but it was on Blue Sky, but like one time I always just play it on my computer and I press pause, if someone walks into my office, but my finger slipped and I pressed the skip button and I had no idea where I am. Right. So like, it was Paris I was listening to, which is one of the longer ones. And so it's like, oh goddamn, I guess I'll just go to the next show. Like, I'm not gonna re-listen to who knows how long it has been.
Yeah, I gotta admit, it's like getting a little challenging, and it raises kind of an interesting question, which is like, all right, I shouldn't bitch because these are designed for a live experience where you're locked in, and yet that's not strictly true, because like it raises the question, what is the definitive way to listen to this? Because if you see it live, you are actually getting just one little glimpse at what is a huge, 6+ hour composition, which means that the only way to really get this whole project in is to listen to the recorded soundboards. Mm-hmm. And so if that's the proper way in, and you're already willing to chop it up by virtue of like, you're going to perform just little pieces, well then hell, just chop it up a little bit further. You know what I mean? Make each release like 4 tracks long, or you know what I mean? Something. You could just call them A, B, side A, side B, or something. But I think that would help.
I agree. I guess though it would maybe take longer. So in the interest of getting set E out on time, let's not go that way.
Very true. Yeah, don't start now. You can't start now. All right, let me just read it. I just kind of stuck a couple more listener emails in here that just kind of had their high overall thoughts, and then we can get that out on the table and start digging into individual tracks. But first we heard from listener June, who said, man, set C, rhythm is back and it's funkier than ever. Dublin 23 was what got me into the concept of 2022- and believe in the extremely ambitious idea of a, quote, mega set. Listener Rob said, overall, this is a great show. I think I prefer set C to sets A and B. The hip-hop jazzy first half of the show is wonderful. Obviously, I would be delighted to have been at one of the shows that ran well over 70 minutes. More Autechre is always welcome. That being said, Ren is my favorite set to listen to when I'm out and about. It's so cool, funky, and just makes me want to strut as I listen to Drain 3 and 3-tone. The techno is also really, really good at the end. I would score Dublin 8 out of 10 and Ren 8.5 out of 10. Rob's whole email was kind of like going back and forth comparing the two. And then finally, listener Joe says, overall, set C made me think back to Confield a lot this week when listening to it. Sections 26 and 27 in particular remind me both of Parhelic Triangle in terms of the overall vibe, especially the creepy progression, and also VI Sco's Poise in terms of the percussion. I went back and listened to Confield a bit this week, and even after listening to completely state-of-the-art AE all week, it's amazing to me how if Confield were released today, it would still sound totally fresh and incredible, and to think that they somehow pulled it off in 2001 is just totally insane to me. I especially wanted to read this email up front because I also got very heavy Confield vibes from some parts of this, which I will shout out as we talk about them, and went back and listened to Confield this week and also felt, Joe, exactly like you, that like, what if Confield is just the best album ever? It just is so freaking good. But anyway, any kind of just more high level thoughts now that we've got some of that on the table, or do you want to jump into the tracks?
Let's jump right in.
All right. So we'll start off with tracks 21 through 23. I started saying the year. 21 through 23. The fan name of this track in the TTT edit is Corsine. Of course, these track numbers we're using, again, they come from AE pages. Now, you'll remember that this was the end of, I say all of the set Bs, but there are only two, but it's always the end of set, or the kind of begins the ending part of set B. So a lot of overlap there. And this is the start of most of the set Cs. That includes Sydney, Dublin, Brussels, Paris, Krems, as well as Lisbon and Oslo, those sets that haven't been released. So in other words, we talked about this last time. Of course, we've got the little footnote from AE pages, which we discussed last time, that clarifies that one of the samples that gets scratched in this segment is the It's Time to Change sample from Jan and Deed's Extension Time. It should be noted that the same sample is present in Chris the Glove Taylor's Ichiban Scratch, which appeared in multiple of Autechre's mixes, including the 2015 Deck Mantle mix. I also wanted to get some listeners on the record here. Listener Sunil wrote in to say, Corsine is just the most. My love for it seems to grow every time I listen. It's all of dark and ominous, warm and cozy, poignant and melancholy. The opening is like an enveloping descent. After the droning dies down, there is a particularly sparse section, and then the latter half of Corsine is where its beauty and emotion hit full stride. There is so much variation and possibility. One of my favorite moments in AE Live, favorite version, is Dublin. Listener Rob wrote in with kind of a rather long play-by-play that I would have edited down, but I just kind of liked it. Rob writes, NTS-like plotting beats to start things off with atmospheric tones overhead, twangy melodies, layered build-up of scratches of noises, all built around the original steady beat. Tones come in and out around the increasingly arithmetical beat. I don't even know what that word means. Background atmospheric backtone comes in, and around 4 to 5 minutes in, real NTS Volume 1 vibes so far. Steady and fun so far. Beat drops out around 6:30 and sounds like hitting a hollow plastic bin takes over. Beats return, building vibration tones in the background around 8:30 in. Is that a synth melody briefly coming in and out of the background, followed by church bell-like tones. Moody and darker now with these bell-like tones followed by scratching. How are they doing this on a laptop? Snatches of hip-hop before it fades out again. Synth back and lighter, more hopeful vibe. Then collapses down to end the track. Scratching, filler tones, rewind-like tones. Odd sounds and snatches of tracks. This connects Corsine to Drain 3, the drum track now laid down, the effects around it, hip-hop pacing of drum rhythm. Overall, I love the NTS Sessions Volume 1, so this intro is very welcome. And then finally, another longer one. A lot of people had something to say about this. Listener Joe said, last week, I mentioned how segment 21 was a super obvious place to begin set C and was a major moment in set B where the whole thing kind of wakes up after stalling for a while. However, after listening to a lot of set C this week, I'm not really sure I agree anymore. I absolutely love the beginning of Corsine, or section 21, with the sinister shimmering intro that sounds like the best of NTS 3 and 4. It's funny that that it was Rob who compared it to NTS 1, and now Joe is comparing it to 3 and 4. And then when the drums come in and lock in and out of sync with the shimmering background, it's a real highlight of the whole live set for me. However, every time I've listened to sections 22 and 23, I've always gotten impatient waiting for section 24 to finally kick in. 22 and 23 are still Autechre level quality, but section 22 in particular just kind of bubbles and dithers in this way that whenever I zoom in on individual sections or skip to the section in particular, I always really enjoy it. But when I hear it in the context of the full set, I always get kind of pissed off by the end and just want to get on with the show. So hell of a lot I wanted to throw all out there before we start talking about it. How did you feel, Dan, revisiting Corsine in the context of starting set C rather than kind of drawing set B to a close?
I think it works as an obvious good start of the set. We've got this like pulsing drone. That's just a nice way to start, like gets everybody in the room, like, in the mood. I was thinking of how when we saw the show, like, remember it was like those red lights for a while in between the openers and them. I don't know if that kind of thing happened, but, I was thinking like, okay, that sets the mood. And then to start out with this drone would be like so nice. And then it moves like into this nice, like groovy beat. Just like some real nice bass, real like good bass drum syncopation on it and stuff. Like just, I feel like if you were in the room, like you just instantly be like, all right, yeah, this is gonna be a dancey night, and then it does get like a little sparse in track 22, but I really like that like pattern it goes into. It like reminded me of like drums falling down or something, and then just really cool drums, like sounds themselves, like they're always like recognizable as a drum, but then when you think about it hard, it's not, just like overall very bouncy, very percussion heavy. There's like some metallic sounds, classic, but always there's like a steady like hi-hat going, just keeps this whole thing like so danceable. I feel like almost the whole time there's something, to go to. And then of course we lead into that scratching section. Again, how are they doing that in Max without, DJ controllers or anything? That I think it's just like a really great intro, live and as a recorded.
Yeah, I still love it. I think I actually love it even more here rather than in the context of set B. I think it feels like a great start for all the exact same reasons you said. I mentioned before, I think it feels a little bit more refined somehow. Like it felt a little bit like, oh, look, they're doing hip hop. And I don't know if I just got used to it listening to it so much, or if it actually does feel a little bit like, I don't know, they've kind of blended the elements together a little bit more. I've noticed like the snare sometimes has a real like kind of weird doorstopper type of a sound to it, like a springy type of a sound. And it just feels a little bit less like overtly trying to sound like a classic hip hop record, I think just slightly. And it makes it feel a little bit more Autechre, like Autechre's genuine version of this. And I'm especially talking about like some of the 2024 sets where they still continue to do this, and it feels like they've been kind of marinating on it for a little while. Other than that, I don't know if I have a ton to add, because I think the things I love about it are the same things I loved about it last episode when we talked about it with set B, where, it kind of has, like you said, this nice steady beat, some quite like funky, little organ stabs and this kind of clav sounding type of a riffing in it. Great groove. And then, I think I forget who it was, Rob, who had kind of talked about, sounds like plastic bins getting, beat like, I called it last time like a trash can solo or something, kind of takes over. And again, that is just like such an impressive form of, I think of it as like 3D sound modeling. I can't believe this this is like a artificial object. But then, the real highlight, the scratching. And like I said last time, the gem here is beneath the scratching. The scratching almost distracts you from all the pretty shit that is going on. The church bells, Rob mentioned this too, but there's lots of just like dense delays, kind of this organ type sound is kind of like vamping over it and adding nice melody there, especially I think in some of the later 2024 sets, even dreamier synths than there had been, like this kind of shimmering quality. The pro tip is just to honestly like pay less attention to the scratching, even though I love it. I think it is, again, like kind of nicely woven into the fabric here, but the whole world beneath it is like just, I love it.
I think that speaks to what we were talking about a little bit earlier too. Like, like obviously this is made for live, but there's like an intention of you to listen to this closely. I think, like the things like that. I feel like in the room, you're gonna, the scratching obviously draws your eye, like it's or your ear, it's the shiny object. But like you're right, like and that's why like. Oh, we listened to these for a couple weeks or longer than normal because, we had that break. Like normally just listening to anything for 3 weeks, like over and over and over, I'll get a little tired of it. But like I was genuinely like never sick of these. And I think it's because like there's so much always going on, you could focus on something else and find something new, basically every listen.
Yeah, it's also interesting that when you listen to the sets that start with this piece, because again, they eventually start kind of skipping this and starting on sort of the next piece, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you kind of realize that there is scratching kind of buried, again, woven into the fabric of the first like huge stretch of this. I mean, you hear it kind of pop in and out like way late into this set. And so I kind of like the idea of starting with a very prominent version of it in Corsine, and then you kind of hear it, or sometimes you even wonder if your mind is playing tricks on you, like you kind of hear it creeping in and out like through almost the entire rest of the set. So in that respect, I really kind of like establishing that up front here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I mentioned it, like you sometimes you feel like, is that a voice coming through, it like kind of haunts the entire rest of the set.
It made me realize also that I think sometimes the kind of fluttering, crazy noises that Autechre is making, it makes me wonder in retrospect, like, were those meant to kind of emulate scratching a little bit, or are they using them like scratching? You know, because sometimes you can't tell, like, oh, is that classic, like, Autechre just fuck-uppery, you know, or is that still scratching I can hear? And it made me think, like, all of a sudden in retrospect, like, man, what if that's what inspired them to make those sounds in the first place? Before we move on, I wanted to ask, though, about, you know, Joe's thought here, which is, like, having spent a lot of time with this in the context of set B, do you ever then feel impatient, like Joe describes being, like, I just want to get on to the proper set C, you know? Like, I mentioned before that as these sets get longer and longer, I sometimes did want to skip ahead so that I could get deeper in the set without any chance of being interrupted. But I get what Joe means. It's sometimes I did feel like, okay, let's get on into it, you know?
Yeah, I understand. But I think that's totally just because, like, we're listening to it too
How
much.
we're doing this.
You know? Yeah. I think that's a symptom of, like, what we're doing. I don't think if you were listening to these as a normal human, you would have that same feeling, because, you know, who would be listening to hour and a half tracks 50 times?
Yeah. Well, the question is, who are any normal humans even listening to this? But all right, we'll move on to the next section, which is tracks 24 through 25. Fan name here is Drain 3. This is another one that we talked about last time, because this is the end of every set B, all two of them. And so we'll kind of talk about it as far as, like, revisiting it in this new context. But yeah, this happens to be the start of some of the set Cs. That includes Rennes, Barcelona, Madrid, and then Riga, which has not yet been released. I'll run through some kind of, well, first, AE Pages, of course, clarifies that the sample that gets scratched here is from Besides, that's the artist, Change the Beat, specifically the famous Fresh sample. And then I've got some listeners here. So Sunil says, Drain 3 is awesome. This was my first set C obsession. More than any other segment, I think this one really benefits from speakers. My favorite versions are from Sydney and Paris. Rob, again, gives us this long play-by-play. He says, hip-hop drums and rhythmic pacing leads into Drain 3. Echoey tones extend and contract over the top of the hip-hop beats. Tones raise up and then collapse down. Hip-hop beat now begins to slow, approaching trip-hop levels, whilst the echoey tones give way to higher-pitched, trilling tones. Jangly Eastern-like tones introduced over thrumming synths. Rhythm now builds in background, synths and effects to form brief melodies before the atmospheric tones return to drown the melody, although it still runs in the background. Atmospheric dark tones return to run over the rhythm. This is a killer tune, but runs slower than at Rennes. Again, Rob is kind of going back and forth commenting, comparing Dublin and Rennes, and therefore is more laid back and atmospheric, lacking the other's strut and attitude, ends with scratching-like effects and gradual fade, getting Massive Attack vibes. Cheap drum settings on a Casio keyboard with snatches of samples act as filler before the next tune. Scratches and snatches of samples are back. Drum beat returns faster and is constantly being messed with. Synth tones added over drums. Still dark and quite Massive Attack-like tones. Feels more trip-hoppy compared to the hip-hop swagger of Rennes. This feels like AE doing their version of Inertia Creep off the Mezzanine album. Overall, this is a dark, broody, and sinister tune, one of my favorites from the night. And finally, listener Joe says, I'm of two minds about starting with section 24 as the opener rather than 21. On one hand, I feel like it has all of the markings of a classic, incredible opener, but on the other hand, it's so epic that I feel like it deserves a bit of an introduction. I've always loved how NTS Session starts with a bit of an endurance test with T1A1, which in the context of NTS1 flows perfectly. I think this is where they start to hit limitations with this flowing live set terms in terms of format, and I think that if they were forced to fit it into something like a series of albums or EPs, they would find a way to nail down the correct flow. So revisiting this one, what do you think?
Yeah, I love this one, of course. I love, like, it falls kind of back into the drums and drone, you know, which, you know, makes some sense, it sometimes being the opener. I feel like so often in this, like, it sounds like the sounds are being chewed on, you know? like just like, I don't know. I don't know how else to put it. It just feels like the drums and everything are just being chewed up. I think at Dublin, there's, like, this, like, real, like, twinkly, like, alien kind of talking sound that goes on. You know, of course, There's some more scratching here. This is what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, like taking this famous sample here and using it in a way that like is unlike it's ever been used before, which I think is, just such a cool way to do everything. But still we've got like a beat going on behind, still never leaves.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of, just carries right on that like steady beat, but it's interesting how it sort of like snaps into a slightly new shape or something. Corsine feels kind of big and lumbering to me, and then Drain 3 is like a little bit more, I don't know, it's just got a little bit more pop to it. And actually one thing that I find endlessly fascinating about this section is as it's kind of, it's still kind of plodding along, but sometimes you'll notice like the drums suddenly like become like more like hip hop sample sounding. You notice that? Like it'll suddenly all this like sound really like tight and snappy, and then it kind of like fades back into this kind of more plodding murk or something. It's really interesting. It's almost like you can hear, I don't know what it is. I can't imagine it's totally a sample or something, but it almost feels like these drums were sampled and they just fucked them up so much that they just sound unrecognizable. But then every once in a while, the original peeks through or something. It's very interesting. We talked all about it, about how much I love this kind of droney, it's just like every time the one hits, there's like a big drone bomb. And actually what I sort of appreciated listening to it this time is that drone bomb kind of grows in size. Like the first couple hits are a lot smaller, like just sort of a rubble. And then each time it repeats, it seems to get bigger and bassier. The feedback kind of swells just before it then goes like boom, And it's also quite nice how that bass note eventually sort of becomes like a 2-note kind of back and forth pattern. There's like kind of a subtle musicality here. And finally, I think it's like one thing I don't even know if I consciously noticed last time, but what's really cool is underneath the thing giving it like the bounce is there's kind of like a real electro type of a sound just going like dump 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 like underneath, and sometimes delays on it and stuff. And I don't know, it feels like just this really heavy, like I kept comparing it to Swans last time, but actually it is subtly extremely groovy and still kind of like hip hop elements all mixed in there. As for how it works as an opener, I love it as an opener. I think it is so menacing and awesome, but I kind of agree with Joe here that it needs to be earned. Like it is so heavy that I like the way Corsine builds into it,
I think overall, I think my favorite show was maybe Dublin, or at least maybe the one I listened to the most. And because I agree with Joe. I like that, like this one has like a logical, sort of beginning sound to it, because it kind of brings that drone back and everything. But like, I think it's such a cooler move to like do that. Corsine gets like kind of chaotic, and then all that falls apart, and then we sort of do it again, but in a totally different way. I don't know. I kind of like that like double build. I think works a little better as the beginning of the set. And what Joe said too, like maybe that is sort of a weakness of doing this like mega set is like, if you're really going to do it in order, you can't always be like, well, if we play, Corsine, we got to have Drain 3, or backwards, whatever. But like, you can't always do that. So like, you do kind of like paint yourself into a bit of a corner, or have to have, 3-hour long sets or something. But this is like an obvious, I feel, place to start a set when you don't have the time for Corsine.
Yeah. So we can move on into what, arguably kind of continues this same vibe even further. And the first sort of new stuff we'll be talking about this week, which is tracks 26 through 27. The fan name here is 3-Tone, and it's named that because you can see that title on a screen recording of a demo that Sean shared for this track in a since deleted Mastodon post. So according to AE Pages, in the demo, one of the files loaded into the sampler is Gap Band's Burn Rubber on Me, Why You Want to Hurt Me, specifically the Tire Screech Faster part at the start. And then another side note here is in an April 2025 Ask Autechre Anything, the guys were asked, what do you think about the alternate names people have given these different segments for 2022 Dash, such as Three Tone or Cata 7? Rob responded, they're good sometimes. I'm not 100% to read, but I get why they are what they are. And Sean responded, I mean, Three Tone is one of my column names, so that's fine, but most of the fan-made ones are just kind of funny. I think we agree with them on that. Bunch of listeners wrote in about this one, which seems to be a kind of highlight here. In fact, maybe I'll ask you, Dan, to go back and forth here. I'll kick us off with Joe, who says, if I had to pick a single favorite section from the entire live set so far, it has to be section 26. It almost feels like an Autechre remix of 80s Kraftwerk, and I think that the percussion on this, and even more so in section 27, is maybe the most impressive work they've ever done. The amount of nuance and detail that every single little sound has is truly incredible, and I can imagine some alien percussion concert with instruments that don't exist here. Will you read the next one, Dan?
Yeah, June says Drain 3 to 3 Tone is one of the funnest sections of any Autechre set. So much rhythm and dance in there. Can't help but love the synthesized horns and orchestral hits, but eventually the set makes way for these syncopated, nightmarish remixes of these tracks, synth-morphing and changing in front of you.
Listener Sunil says, the first half of Three Tone is probably the catchiest and most earwormy section of Set C. The progression feels very neatly structured early on until the clarinet comes in for a second time, and then things become more like a murky fever dream. Percussion is the biggest star of the show here for me.
Yeah, Rob says metallic warped tones as if sheeting is being blown by the wind. Scratchy liquid tones play over the top of the warped metal tones. Reverb heavy tones and horns make an appearance. Simple melody is making an appearance as the background atmosphere swells and gets more urgent around 32 minutes in. This is followed by the saxophone freakout, very jazzy at Ren's. This horn freakout sounds more synthetic and less like genuine horns here. Simple melody is back with snatches of voices. Overall, I prefer the Ren's version of this tune as it felt jazzier and somehow cooler. This version is okay, but snatches of horns and obviously more synthetic and therefore less cool over the bass drum beat. Tinny drums roll and rattle with warped metal moans to finish the track. Actually enters a freakout phase. This track is very cool. Overall, this set is a highlight for me, although Ren's has the better version, in my opinion.
I feel like you say Ren completely differently every time you're.
I know, because I don't know what the hell. I'm a dirty American. I don't know about Europe.
We don't know anything. Yeah, I mean, this one is definitely a highlight. I mean, kind of to what we were just talking about. The cool thing about it is that they go ahead and do the Drain 3 outro every time, in which the drums stop and it is just, these like repeated, just sort of drone bass bomb type notes sustaining and feedbacking and ringing out. They occasionally kind of like hit a couple drum hits in there, almost like, just at the end or something, but it basically just turns into like a big breakdown. And then that makes for a great end of the set. But what's so awesome about Three Tone is that it just all of a sudden everything snaps right back into action. I get so hyped from that. I don't know why. Like, it just feels like the track is just like, it's destroyed. It's like gotten so heavy and it's just falling apart. And then hell no, it's round 2. We're back, I just love that so much. And I love it even more in the sets that start with the Corsine section, because it feels like it is truly earned that the thing would start to fall apart. And then it is so exciting. I just imagine being in the room when this fucking snapped back in. Like, it must've been so fun. And like everybody says, it snaps back in with kind of the same beat we've been doing. It's like the bass note is doing the same back and forth on 2 notes thing it was doing in the Drain 3 section. We've got that same kind of like electro sound underneath, adding a nice groove, but it adds this little 3-tone melody. Dun, dun, dun. And actually, subtly, you might not notice, but there is kind of a harmony on that. Like, that's sort of like a lower note that is really just insanely catchy straight away. I think you could play this to any normie and they would be like, wow, that's really good.
Yeah, totally. I love that dun 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 like little thing that comes in. It's like, it's the catchiest. It kept getting stuck in my head and everything. Yeah. And I absolutely love this. And I agree with you. Like, this one is more earned starting at Corsine. I really think, that's a better. And the more we talk about it, I'm getting more resolute in it. That I think like it really just like it makes you earn it, you know.
Yeah, and the cool thing to me about this track is that it does the kind of catchy little hook thing a couple times, and then it kind of, I think it was, gosh, which listener was it? Sunil, who called it a clarinet, but I was thinking of more of his like squealing feedback or something. Like basically it does this sort of catchy hook thing, and then that kind of stops, and instead we get this kind of weird squealing, I mean very kind of jazzy type of like a horn freak out type melody. Then it'll go back to the catchy thing, and then eventually the catchy thing starts trading on and off with what sounds like a cymbal solo or something, somebody tapping with sticks like on the on like the top of a cymbal, but like just straight up like rolling with it, and it's so cool because then eventually the feedback kind of comes in on top of that. It's weird because somebody else, who was it? Yeah, Sunil also said percussion is the biggest star of the show here for me. Yeah, it's like another case where the catchy thing is going to catch your ear first, but like after the first couple listens, you start to really appreciate like the crazy things that they're doing with this like hat sound. Like it's just like it's just so, every little section of this is just so cool.
Yeah, I love that. It's such like a rattling, like, sound. It's crazy. It's really great. I really love the way the bass drum sounds throughout the whole thing. But like I think it's like track 26 or so, like that bass drum, compliments to the chef.
Yeah. Actually, it's cool because when that like sort of cymbal soloing starts going, I do feel like the kick gets like a little extra injection of pep or something. It's just so funny because I feel like you listen to Corsine and Drain 3, it sounds like some big lumbering machine like struggling to get going, and then Three Tone, it like finds it and it just keeps like getting more and more energy. It's just such a thrill. I mean, I would have loved to see this. Yeah, so we can carry on, I think, into the next section, which, AE Pages has divided this up as tracks 28 through 31, which I think tells you something about how kind of weird and nebulous this section can kind of be, because the TTT fan edit, which has named this 2mmLV, has really smashed together like a huge, 20 plus minute section of this, I think, not totally knowing like where to even split this up. This is another track that Sean shared a demo of in a Since Deleted Mastodon post. AE Pages has these footnotes, which I got to be honest, I don't know if I even totally understand what the hell they're saying, but it says, Sean included a description of this video he posted with reading, reasonable facsimile of the levee break snare from a model made of water and spider silk. Who knew? He also added alt text to the video reading, a video showing a modeled snare drum roughly emulating the snare drum from When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. I don't fucking hear this at all. I don't know what, I don't even know what this is.
I literally, when I was listening to this, like writing notes, I was like, I don't hear the fucking levee, like I play the drums. The levee breaks is in my head. I was like, I'll have to put it on just to make sure. And I was like, I don't hear it. I don't hear that at all.
I don't have any idea what he's talking about, but he was apparently excited that he had made a snare that reminded him of Led Zeppelin, out of water and spider silk. I just have no idea. There's another note here that I also don't know how to interpret. It says, the snare 4ML shown is an example snare instrument from Modelays for Macs, with Modelays also appearing in the 2022 demo for its custom-made clarinet instrument. So I don't know if any, programmers, gearheads will understand what the hell was being said there, but that is what AE Pages wanted us to know. Kind of put some stuff out here for that the listeners wrote in. Here's another long one from Rob, kind of just walking us through all of his thoughts, which I think are almost a fun place to start. Rob says, metal ball bearings rolling around. Reminds me a bit of RDJ. Cool intermission before the next tune. Pretty strings and bass heavy rhythms just before the next tune begins. Very pretty. Quite light for what I expect from AE. Is it harp strings? Is this quartet? Deep, bassy, rough, and dirty sounding tones over a steady beat. This one is more of a keyboard freakout jam. The drums are so steady, however, more effects being added, which is helping make this tune more interesting to me until finally those deep keyboard tones fade out. Metallic tones come in and out over quite a heavy bass track. This is getting very busy, but it's getting really good. More sound design than the earlier tracks in the set. Nice change. Minute 49 onwards sounds like ducks. Subtle melody playing in the background. Light and airy, sounds like a synth, maybe even just a repeated key or chord being pressed rhythmically and monotonously whilst the freeform effects run over the top. 55 minutes in, sounds like a propulsive bass solo. I like it. It's frenetic but also funky. The track ends with the sound of wooden sticks tapping a rhythm over the bass solo. You want to hear read the next two, Dan?
Yeah, Sunil says, I find this to be the most perplexing part of Set C. It's like an exercise in extended, unreleased tension. It's great, but if I listen at the wrong time or in the wrong setting, it can stress me out. And then June goes on to say that Renz has the most terrifying renditions of 2mmLV.
Yeah, so this one is a weird one for sure. Like I mentioned, the sort of TTT grouping of this feels like way too big to me. And in fact, I kind of think halfway through at track 30, according to AE Pages, we get a pretty noticeable shift, which I would have sort of cut this. But I think in general, we get kind of a weird, the beat that has been kind of carrying us along so far in a pretty steady way, it suddenly gets like kind of squashed, like a little bit more subdued, a little bit more like lo-fi-ish, on the 2 and the 4, there's like this very kind of lo-fi clap going on. The kick has this like kind of light tap that even sounds almost like a vintage drum machine or something. Rob went all into this, but we get these weird, like pretty plucking melodies underneath. I kept calling this like the Zelda section because it reminds me of like the Great Fairy music or something, like very pretty underneath. And then weirdly that just vanishes as this gets like more and more just weird and fucked up. We get lasers come in. We get, it's funny because I think it was listener Rob actually who wrote in with a link to, it was like, I think it was Rob talking about how his and Sean's wives also don't like Autechre, and they have called it pots and pans music. And this is a real pots and pans hour right here. This part gets into that real like heavy pots and pans section. And then, yeah, there's that sort of hard beat switch. I think maybe we should just try to talk about like the first half of this so far. You kind of agree with me on that? And what do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, this is great. We're keeping that beat where that the vocoder like kind of sample things come and go, but it's like always like so distorted and unintelligible. I think the snare, I was really kind of focusing on it because of Sean's comments, but like it sounds very synthetic, and I don't mean that in like a bad way, but it does sound like it was built of something. I don't know if water and spider silk are the ingredients, but I love that big like bass drum or bass that's behind everything. I think one of the listeners said like this is a real speaker kind of section and stuff. Like I would have liked to hear that bass on like a big sound system.
Yeah, I think if you feel lost here, the bass is the thing to pay attention to.
Yeah.
What sort of happens is you kind of get this like groaning sound here and there. This like low groaning. It's just sort of little bits. I mean, you're kind of like distracted and dazzled by these lasers zapping you and these pots and pans clanging. Weirdly, I took notes on. I always pick a couple that are sort of my favorites to take close notes on. In Madrid, I don't know if the pots and pans button was broken, but they just never start. There's no pots and pans on that. It's just lasers. It's like, what happened, guys? But you're kind of dazzled by that, but there's this sort of low groaning underneath. And eventually that groaning starts to kind of become one of the listeners had mentioned this. I think it was Rob, but it starts to sound a little bit like a bass solo, like a little proggy, like a little square pushery or something. Eventually it gets so prominent that I was writing down comps to like, that Yes song Roundabout, like the way the bass starts, like it really sounds a little bit like that. And then as this track continues to evolve, I mean, I think that bass sound, like it then goes from Yes proggy territory into more like post-punky territory gradually. Like it becomes like kind of a floppy, like picked bass sound, kind of like a Joy Division or a Fugazi type of a sound. At certain points, it almost has like a rubber ball type of a quality to it. I mean, basically what I'm saying is over the next 20 minutes, this low groaning is going to evolve into so many different weird shapes and patterns that if you just pay attention to that the whole time, like it's a legit journey in what is otherwise a pretty bizarre, all over the place kind of lost section, you know?
I think that low groaning thing, like you said, I think it is the key, and it's such a good move. Like this whole time we've had this steady, beat kind of going throughout it, always like grounding you. That like kind of turns into the pots and pans and everything here, but like it gets picked up by that bass. If you now just ground yourself to that bass, like there's always, like you've always got one foot on the earth here in set C, I feel like, and I don't think that always happens in A, at least. They just do it in such like a awesome way where I think it took me kind of a few listens to even like realize that was happening, like until I like noticed that groaning was the key,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that sort of unlocked it for me too. One question I had about this is like, well, okay, so first off, there is, like I said before, this genuinely weirdly pretty moment early on when you get these kind of plucky, like Zelda type sounds underneath. What I find utterly bizarre is how short this goes on. It's just a couple bars way down buried underneath, and then it stops. And yet they do it every single set. In fact, when I hear that pretty sound, I know that we are leaving behind, the 3-tone and moving into the 2mm section, right? And it's almost like, what's the point? Why do that for just a couple bars just to take it away? And it must have been important to them because they did it every time. But like, what is the deal with that?
I was thinking about that a little bit, and in the context of like, how are they communicating between the two of them? It's not like track 20 is always 5 minutes long, or whatever. Like it dramatically changes between sets. And I was wondering, like, are sounds like that maybe like sort of cues between them? Like maybe that's Sean playing it, saying like, all right, move on to the next thing. I've always really wondered, like, because if they're using like two separate laptops, and somebody can correct me, but like, does Max like hook up? Like, are those two things connected in any way other than just by sound? Like, can they see what each other are doing? Are they team viewer and into each other? Like, I really would love to know that as a computer whiz.
Yeah, I mean, everybody jokes that they're like, on AIM or something talking to each other, but
yeah.
I don't know if AIM still exists, but like
it doesn't actually. It got shut down.
Well,
yeah.
I like that though. That's some good detective shit. Like, what if some of these sounds that feel kind of like, why does this just appear for a little bit? What if it is kind of signaling like to each other? That would be really, really interesting, actually. The other thing I think that to really note about this is toward the end, we get a section that I think makes the whole thing worth it. If you're feeling like confused and lost or whatever, just hang on until you get here, which is this kind of beautiful beaming synth starts like shimmering in. It reminds me of set A actually, when that kind of patch from F7 off of Sign, it like appears momentarily and kind of like shimmers in this. It's strikingly pretty because there hasn't been anything pretty at all in that set so far. But this, we get actually quite a nice sustained. Actually, one thing that pisses me off about Dublin is that it is only like a minute and a half that they do this, whereas the other sets, they really kind of linger on it. But it's almost like these searching little like synth lines that kind of, I don't know, just drift over the top of this thing. I find that awesome. I love when we get there. And I also wanted to mention, I don't know, this is total side thing. I don't know if you'll agree with me at all, but when I was listening to this, as the bass gets like seriously post-punkier and post-punkier to me, it reminded me of Joy Division, and it reminded me that it had been really quite a long time since I listened to Unknown Pleasures. And I put it on, and first off, I was like, wow, this is the best album ever. I mean, this is truly just such a great album. But I was struck. I don't know. I dare anybody to try this. And then I swear to God, if anybody is on Mastodon, ask Sean if they were listening to Joy Division around the time that they came up with this, because the sound palette is so strikingly similar. In fact, when you listen to the first track on Unknown Pleasures, Disorder, You know the way that it kind of like goes crazy at the end, like I got the spirit, lose the feeling. It's like it reminds me of like the way that Cat of Seven just goes off the rails at the end of this set. The last track, I Remember Nothing. It really sounds a lot like Drain 3 here, with that just like kind of bass bomb that just kind of gets held and sustained, over like a slow marching beat. The laser sounds on the track Insight off of that album, I think really remind me of the laser sounds here. So God damn it, this is my theory. All right. Somebody asked them, like, were you guys listening to Joy Division around this time? Because if you go back to Unknown Pleasures, I think you'll be struck at how similar a lot of aspects of the sound palette weirdly are.
I'll have to listen to it tonight, but you've had this other theory of like the history of music throughout this. Are we just in 1980? Now.
Well, I was thinking about that too, because like I don't think they get credit for this, but they should. Like Joy Division are important to the history of electronic music because they were the first rock band to try to sound like machines, I mean, not the first, I guess you could give that to like Kraftwerk or something, but like they really in a weird way like perfected this, like, everybody calls Stephen Morris the human drum machine. It's like it's not like Kraftwerk where it's actual electronics. It is a rock band trying to emulate that. And I think their whole, their very famous icy production style and stuff, I mean, it's very tri-repete or something. You have to imagine that actually they are important to a lot of artists like this. So I don't think it would be crazy at all if they were doing a little, they were listening to a little Joy Division and just like felt a little inspired. I don't know. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there and see if anybody will pick up what I'm putting down. Let's move on to the next section though, which is tracks 32 to 33 on the AE pages, and the fan name is Vinesive, something like that. We got some listener comments up front. We got Rob again, who says, this comes in dark and propulsive, still very bass heavy, can almost hear the strings being plucked, but there aren't any strings, only machines. Panic tones over the top. This is uneasy. The bass is getting more frantic. Elements of techno kicking in now. Reminds me of that track by Justice, Stress. Drums are clattering over the top of panic chords. Higher register on the keyboard, very uneasy. Drum rolls and snares. Drum solo is outstanding around minute 64. I can imagine the crowd losing their mind at this before it all fades away. Sounds like it would be the end of a regular show, but there is still time to go. Feels more like 4/4 techno now. Where is this going? Overall, ghostly tones over frantic beats. And then we had a short one from listener Sunil, who says, Vinesive's beats are infectious. Both the standard version and the weird Dublin version are great. I would have loved to see some sort of hybrid of the two. What do you think about this next section?
Yeah, I like how, it starts, sort of minimal. The drum sounds in it, like, kind of remind me of hand drums, like congas or something, The synths that are coming, going, picking up pretty fast, groovy beat. I really like that drum solo thing Rob mentioned, just like, it just like turns into almost breakcore kind of thing. And another like little grounding point is I feel like all during that, huge breakcore thing, there's like just some held synth chords that, like, again, if you're lost, you can like, those are the North Star of the section.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, like in the last track, the reason I think that it would be worth sort of splitting 2mm in half just mentally is that you get kind of a hard beat switch in which the beat sort of like takes a couple steps down. It really reminds me of Tortoise or something, like something krautrocky a little bit, the way it's like kind of just chugging along lightly. And then interestingly here, it almost takes like a further step down. You mentioned comparing it to hand drums or something. I think what's interesting is like the bass has gone like fully post-punk here. Like it sounds like kind of a heavy picked sort of a sound. And so the drums kind of take a back seat so that sound becomes sort of the star of the show. The beat like kind of gets weirdly, I don't know, this honestly reminded me a little bit of the kind of awkward, like lopsided arpeggio part of set A a little bit, because the beat gets all like kind of unquantized and weird feeling. I was trying to count it because I think the bass line is doing something like in a different time signature, like maybe like a 9/8 or something. And then the beat is like remaining, I don't know, in 4/4, but like I'm literally too stupid to even count it. Like I'm too confused. I can't even, there's so much going on. I can't even count it, but just something sounds very wrong and weird, even while the underlying kind of energy and pulse like carries right on. In fact, I think this is such a good idea of how to, this whole section of the set, like how to take it down in energy while still building momentum, I think, toward our climax. I think that's really like impressively done.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. And I thought the same thing about the time signature. I was trying to count it too, and I also could not. But I also I think Rob said like this just must have been so great live. You know, this section in particular. I feel like, you know, when that beat switch and everything, like you could just imagine everyone going nuts.
Yeah, and you start to get, you know, on top of everything, one of the listeners mentioned this, but like some, you know, more aggressive slamming drums start to kind of creep in, which I think are really previewing like where we're heading. And this is something that really reminded me of like the beat on Pen Expers from Confield, you know, that kind of like really distinct slamming drum. And then as it kind of reaches the end and what happens, which I think leads us into the last track, is that it's almost like we get so many delays added on top of things that the beat starts to sort of trip over itself in like weird ways. And that really reminds me of the last track on Confield, the Lentic Catacresis, right? Like, so I don't know. I just wanted to shout out like when I was getting like kind of strong Confield vibes from this. But I think we can sort of shift into the final official track here, which is tracks 34 through 35. The fan name for this is Cata 7. This is another, you know, kind of universally decided standout. It is the typical end of set C. Like I said, Sydney weirdly stops at 34. A couple sets that we'll talk about, or performances that we'll talk about, go a little bit further. But first, some listener comments just to kind of get on the table here. Listener June wrote in to say, Cata 7, this is one of the best things Autechre has done. Pure intensity. Also, the use of delays on this set is so good. Listener Mitchell says, overall, this is my favorite set out of all of them because of the progressive ramp up to the end with track 30, he says 36, but I think he means 35 probably, exploding onto an enveloping whole. It's also great driving music too. By the way, the end of track 34 reminds me of Clapping Music by Steve Reich. I think it's because of the rhythm, but it wouldn't be a surprise if it was intentional. I wonder if that kind of like, you know, the like weird kind of time signature polyrhythm thing, it starts happening. I wonder if that's kind of what he's referring to.
It's phasing.
Yeah. Listener Sunil says, Cata 7 makes me think of a dam breach that grows larger and larger as the music progresses. There's so much motion and energy and that wicked, intense atmosphere. Just incredibly good. Favorite versions are from Ren and Barcelona. Listener Rob says, ghostly tones now sound like they are descending down a well as the frenetic beats build and build as squiggles and other peculiar effects are added. This takes on a throw the kitchen sink vibe as Rob and Sean are seemingly looking to blow the back off the venue with a crescendo of beats until it ends. Listener Joe says, I want to point out how section 35 is a perfect example of times in the live set where listening to the soundboard just doesn't do it justice because the third, fourth of it absolutely needs to be heard over a loud sound system because part of the sound is feeling it rattle in you and echo off every corner of the room. I strongly suggest people, for at least this part, listen to an audience recording because that gives a general sense of what it's supposed to sound like. A lot of love for this track, which I absolutely share. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is just crazy. You know, I feel like if you like Autechre, this is Autechre, you know, right here.
Yeah.
This is like the distilled version, you know, like just there's so much going on. Like these sounds are getting like pulled and they're bouncy and squeaky, and on Dublin the vocoder kind of comes in again. We've got like full like breakcore happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's like this really like almost goofy sounding like bouncy kind of real
thing.
It which is a little RDJ-ish, but like it's so goofy. I think like if you listen to it on its own, and I was focusing in on it, and it's just like that sound would be really dumb almost anywhere else, you know. But it's, I mean, that's one of the things I love about him is like hearing these sounds that we don't hear, you know, in contexts we don't hear them in. And I mean, just that build up, like it's just insane, you know. It's just so awesome.
Yeah, this is like, I just kept writing down. I had a hard time like even writing down like what I was experiencing because it just seems like more and more stuff just
live
keeps,
it.
Yeah, it just keeps coming. And I just realized that like when I'm looking at my notes, I just started putting an exclamation point after every single thing I was writing, you know, and like I'm just writing one word, like psychedelic exclamation point, slamming exclamation point, stuttering, you know, like reminds me of the Willy Wonka tunnel exclamation point. Like I was having a hard time like even articulating because it just comes on so fast. You mentioned that like weird squishy thing, and it's like kind of a funny like breakdown because basically everything starts tripping over itself. Like the drums are like trying to do too much and they're like skipping beats and everything. You know, it reminds me a little bit of like Gantz Graph in that way. It's not as like abrasive, but the way that everything is just kind of like colliding but really even more like the lentic catachresis of tripping over itself. And then we kind of end into this like weird squishy sound that's just going like nothing else is happening, and then everything cascades in and like knocks your fucking head off. I mean, the thing I think is really cool about this is that through that first section you can kind of hear these bending notes that are doing this sort of 4-note descending, you know, melody. So it's like boom, 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 you know, it's kind of like running through the thing kind of lightly. When we hit the crescendo of this, it's just, instead of like a series of notes, it's just one sustained like wash of bending sheer sound. And then as we kind of come out the end of that and just more and more shit keeps kind of piling on, the notes are now ascending. And so there is this cool kind of like, I don't know, like a little story that this track tells. Like it's like, it quite literally just feels like being on a roller coaster.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this was like listening to this on a walk, and it's like, man, if other people could hear what's going on in my head, you know?
Through. Yeah, I mean, it's really something else. I think it's really top tier Autechre, and this is like my problem, right? So a couple of people kind of mentioned this, and I just don't know what to make of it. But it's like you just don't get this in the early sets. Like if you listen to Dublin, which I really love Dublin a lot. It's like one of my go-tos weirdly. I think Dublin is like steadier kind of than a lot of the tracks, which I appreciate sometimes. But this whole end part is just not worked out. Like it just does not knock you on your ass the way that some of the later ones. Mm-hmm. Sydney, that is especially true. It stops before it really even like reaches that next level.
Yeah. Totally blue balls you.
Yes, absolutely. And I even feel like, you know, I was listening to Brussels. I feel like Brussels, you know, it goes, but it doesn't like, it's like the last couple, you know, like the Barcelona and the Madrid that like really destroy you, the cremes, you know, like it's almost like they kept deciding I want more and more and more, you know, like that, what's that, that like Kylo Ren meme where he's like screaming like more, you know, that thing. Yeah. Like, so for that reason, I just always found myself preferring, even despite not always having the core scene start, which, you know, I'm very fond of. It's almost like the later the set is, or the performance is, the more wild they're going to go with this and the more I'm going to love it. You know, so like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, isn't it disappointing when you listen to Dublin and it's just not there?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, and maybe that's where the fan edit and stuff comes in, you know, where you can get, you know, best of both worlds. But I agree. I mean, it definitely this is a section that feels like they continue to work on it, continue to build, you know, like it gets better as time goes on.
So you get what I was asking at the start then, like why release the early rough unfinished versions of this unless they wanted us to hear like how this thing, you know, kind of progressed. You know what I mean? Like why release something like Sydney where it clearly wasn't done?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's always like, I think there's like things about all those sets that are interesting in their own respect. And I mean, definitely it's interesting to see it get built up and, you know, and how it progresses. I assume that most people that listen to Autechre probably like are music nerds or gearheads and stuff, you know, so like it's the kind of thing that it seems like pretty on brand for the fan base, you know?
Yeah. It's just, I don't know. I just find it so interesting. Yeah. Is it the case that they were like, there's stuff about that we love so much we want to release it, even though we clearly weren't like totally satisfied with the end? Or is this set more meant to be like a behind the scenes look or like showing us the nuts and bolts and the mistakes? Or I just continue to wonder about this. But we've got one more sort of section that I want to talk about, but we can do this maybe more briefly because tracks 36 and beyond are really the typical start of set D. And I want to like dig in super deep when we talk about that next time, but we can talk about it sort of a little bit here since it does end some of the sets. Again, it's reached by Paris, Barcelona, and Madrid, as well as a little bit the unreleased Hague set. Madrid actually goes the farthest to track 40. We'll talk about this again a lot more next time, but what did you think of kind of this like beyond section?
Yeah, I mean, it's so great. Like that, the crescendo from the last one into these like this heaven of synth, and then like these like big metal banging, it kind of sounds like a door being shut, but with like more reverb than exists in the real world. Or like I talked about this, I think it was in set A, like hitting a guy wire, like how they made the laser sound for Star Wars. Like it's like sort of that big like metallic. I don't know. I just that's like the metallic thing is like a feature of Autechre that I've always loved, and like here I just feel like it's done so cool and awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like this is they're fond of the metallic type sounds, obviously the pots and pan type sounds, but here they start really using them for like melodic purposes, which is really striking. I think that the start of set D here, which, like you said, the whole kind of Cata 7 thing like builds up and explodes, and then it just hard cuts into, I like how you described it as heaven, because it's just like very pretty, like it just sounds like cascading like synths just kind of falling like leaves or something, just gently. And then, this really weird but very melodic, like kind of octavey bass type of a thing. Like I get why you would call it metallic, because it's got this weird like resonant ringing to it. Kind of comes in a very obviously melodic way. The next sort of section, which the fan name for that is Orosol, is a clear highlight. And again, what's striking about it is how pretty it is. I mean, actually, it starts with like something kind of a little chaotic, but then what it reaches is like, I don't know, something that sounds like a lullaby. I mean, just as pretty as like the prettiest Autechre has ever been. And again, like even track 40, which, as the Madrid reaches that one, again, it like starts off as something really quite weird. I wrote down like this genuinely feels just like three songs are playing on top of each other that have nothing to do with each other. And then eventually it becomes something really pretty. So we're going to talk all about this in much more depth, but I just find it so interesting that if you think about this whole project as telling some story, one of the stories it tells is like the discovery of melody or something, to the point where arguably there's like no melody in set A, the tiniest glimmers of it in set B. In set C, it starts to kind of appear for real. And then in set D, it almost becomes like the primary focus. And there's something really extraordinary about that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's a real payoff when you get here.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is like the most obvious payoff for all these sets, I think. Like it's in like Dublin, you know how you said like this one, it doesn't go quite far enough. Like it really sounds like the plug just gets pulled at, in that, like it just ends. And when it does go beyond, it's just, I don't know, it's such a masterful setup to set D. It reminded me of like like to be continued, sort of thing, like it just like really sets you up. And like we were saying earlier, like this is C is like where you really like, and a lot of listeners said like, you kind of can see like, okay, yeah, this is like one giant project. It like really feels like it's being like decided on now. And I feel like this whole ending thing is like, the glimpse at D is setting you up, it's the teaser trailer kind of action.
Yeah, and it's, and I'm glad you said that because, like the thing to remember, I think really important to remember, is that these set A, B, C, this is all fan made, and I don't think it doesn't always even work, and I don't think Autechre necessarily like 100% thinks of it that way. I think if anything, they want us to think of the beginning and the end of these as sort of permeable a little bit, malleable, right? Like, so in that respects, you kind of think of the tracks that go farther as like giving you a little something extra, but it does kind of work as like a nice payoff to the whole set also. I think it actually feels like it flows quite well. It's fun to listen to these sets. You're happy to continue on. I wanted to read this from listener Joe actually on this point, who says, the end of section 35 transitioning into section 36 is another highlight of the entire live set for me, where the energy couldn't physically get more intense and it just melts away in this epic and not at all cheesy way. As the end of the Riga set, it could not have been more perfect as the crowd was going insane as soon as the percussion stopped and the ambient voices came in, and then just continued to cheer all the way through to the end. From the very little I've heard of set D, though, so far, it seems also to work just as well as an intro to that. So he's talking about kind of like that pretty... You described it as heaven, part of what's called Lux's N2, which is kind of the start of set D. But yeah, as Joe notes, like it works really cool as a conclusion. And actually, I find that whole like Oracel section, because it's so melodic, because it feels like such a payoff, it also makes for like a really beautiful conclusion. So I don't know. I also feel like this is the first time that it genuinely kind of works what they're trying to do, which is like, you could sort of stop it anywhere. I definitely want to get to Cata 7, but after that, you could sort of stop it anywhere, and it feels satisfying.
Yeah, exactly. It feels complete.
Yeah, no matter where, which is like quite an accomplishment, I think.
Yeah, totally.
So we'll talk about that stuff in a lot more detail next time when we do set D proper. But starting to wrap up here, just circling back, if anything about our high-level thoughts have changed. I wonder if, I don't know, something in your overall impressions about this set have changed now that we've talked about it. If you have any new clarity on kind of like the overall project and how we're supposed to be approaching it, additional thoughts about differences between performances, stuff like that, high-level stuff come to mind?
I mean, I think just the more I listen to this, the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, just the more I end up loving it. This is, I think like this is clearly my favorite so far. And I always worry, like, I think I said this at the start, but like, is it just because it's the one I'm in right now?
Right.
But I think that really, like, this one, none of the other ones like got stuck in my head, or, sometimes I would have to not force myself, but be like, oh, I gotta listen to this a few more times. Like this one, I was like pumped to listen to it each and every time. It just, I felt like it was just getting better, more, noticing more things. It's so dense, and there's just so much to chew on here.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Do you agree with me that this is like would you put this in the kind of, upper tier Autechre in general, you think?
Again, it's hard to say because, I always worry about recency bias, but like,
yeah,
I think so. I think heavily, like NTS I love, but it's hard to recommend that to anybody or whatnot, but like, not that AE 2022 is better, but like,
yeah, right.
this set, like, I feel like if you took a friend to see Autechre, that was at least open-minded or something, like, how could you not have a good time here, like during this set?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to go even further, right? Which is like, yeah, something I would want to think about, make sure I'm not doing the recency bias thing, but like just kind of looking at their discography, I'm sort of like, do I like this more than Sign and Plus? Probably. Like, do I like it as much as NTS sessions? I don't know. That's maybe my favorite Autechre thing ever, but do I like it as much as LSEC? I think I probably do, like, so I just feel like it's kind of already like in that upper echelon. And I just wonder, like, as I continue to sort of sit with it, like, I sort of imagine it'll actually rise, is just my gut feeling. The other thing I wanted to ask you here is like, I feel like we've done a pretty good job giving listeners like a recommendation for like where to start or like how to do this. We've shouted out a couple sets, but I honestly feel like my recommendation here is that this set is so fucking good that you should listen to Paris, which is just the most. Like, it's the most of this. It starts in the core scene section and it goes pretty deep into set D, and therefore it's the best. It's the way I feel about the Beatles. Like, the White Album is the best because it's the most Beatles. Paris is the best because it's the most set C.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're going to go wrong starting with any of these. I kind of had a soft spot for Dublin. Just some moments in that one like really stuck out to me and all. But there's the negative of the ending of that one's not the best. And I think like that ending, like it can really grab you. So I think Paris is a good one. I'll go ahead and agree with you.
Yeah, and if you're scared, do Ren, because Ren is like the shortest and sweetest, and it is like just fire all the way through. I mean, it just, yeah. So I don't know. Honestly, this is like the first time that I feel like you almost can't go wrong. Like they're all
totally.
The quality is just so high here. All right. A last couple of things is, we got a couple of listener emails that are more like big picture things or even beyond this that I wanted to sort of finish by discussing. This is from listener Joe, who says, again, about the nature of this project. For years, fans have been dreaming of an RDJ style outtake dump, or at least special editions to hear what, for example, draft 7.1 through 29 might have sounded like. I wonder if this is exactly that. AE is using this live tour as a way to not only test out / work on different versions of this material themselves, but also show various possibilities for each of the different track sections throughout this set of work that could be considered start to finish the next Autechre album project thing. Do they move on to a new section when they feel like they've perfected a certain part of the overall project, or that they've gone through all the interesting permutations that there are to go through, or do they just get bored after a while and want to move on? In the transitions from finishing completely with one set and starting a new one, do they go back and forth as long as they still have new ideas for the previous set? How do you think they decide to officially move on? I feel like this is another way of asking the question I keep asking you of like, what exactly is this? But what do you think? How do you think they decide when it's time to move on?
I mean, I think like personally, like when I played shows and things, like you get kind of sick of doing the same thing. And I can imagine, like doing this as a job, like probably gets even more boring. So I would imagine it's like when they feel like moving on, because they've squeezed all the juice out of those that they can, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then I think they are strikingly impatient. I mean, these sets they only play them like a couple times. I mean, there are like what eight or so set A's. There are only 2 set B's, obviously. Yeah. There's not a ton of set C's, and in fact, the vast majority of them they just played in 1 month of 2024. They're like almost all in April, and then they came back to it a couple times like in the fall of that year. But it's like, I don't know, how many times do like other bands play their biggest hit, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds? Like I get getting bored and wanting to move on, but that feels like pretty quick. It almost makes me think more of like they actually do feel like they've worked it out or something.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know though. Like when you're doing, it seems like from things we've read about them and all, it seems like they're just like constantly making things. And so I feel like if you are that sort of person, you probably are getting bored quickly. Yeah.
Well, here's from listener Mitchell, who says, now for some speculation, and this is specifically about the recent live sets, the set E's. I think set E is just set A, but edgy. They both have the same progression. Gong Jam and Bleep Bloop have the same function as the mid-set interruption, a consistent sonic palette, and they both even evaporate at the end. Set E also has more throwbacks, not just having a percussion sample from Bass Cadet, but a chromatic riff like I.O., and the last track's melody like their self-titled song. It does make sense that if 22 Dash is one large song, then this is the climax that ties everything back. Probably why, unless 2026 is different, there's no set F. Now, this is interesting because, after this, they announced the 2026 tour, and Mitchell actually wrote in to say, well, scratch that. I think it sounds like they're going to carry on. And my theory about set E being this great, tying it all together, so much for that. But I also wanted to read this because I think it's sort of interesting that, like, we're not going to talk about set E in depth until we get those soundboards, but I did sort of feel listening to like this set already, set C, that there were little like things that reminded me of set A, but like a more refined version. I mean, maybe there's like a self-referential thing going on here, like a reflecting back on their career. I don't know about all that, but at the very least, do you think that, like, does any part of you wonder if in 2022 Dash, they're actually revisiting some stuff from earlier in the set? Or earlier in the whole project, we just aren't necessarily recognizing it. You kind of know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, totally. Especially like, I think when you have samplers and everything, it's easy to reuse things and I mean, even just reuse patterns and change the samples and stuff. So I think that's totally plausible and probably likely, when you're doing like this giant thing like that. I mean, in 6 hours of music, like being self-referential and everything, like I think helps to tie it together. So if they're not doing it, just as a way to revisit things, I think they're doing it as a way to meld everything together.
Yeah, I guess I just, in light of what we were just talking about, it's like, okay, when maybe they move on when they decide they've like squeezed all the juice out of the set, but why would that necessarily all happen at the same time? You know what I mean? There might be like tracks that they actually have more to do with, or they're like, I'd like to come back to that. And so I just wonder if maybe they actually are sometimes open to like coming back to ideas that we heard earlier. Here's another one from Mitchell again, who says, overall, my favorite sets are Athens, Venice, Paris, and Lyon. Complete sets with a little something extra attached. Probably not a coincidence that they're all ancient European cities of significance. This just got me wondering, now that we're a little ways into this, do you think there is any rhyme or reason to like the city affecting what they decide to do or their feelings about the location? You kind of get what I'm asking?
Yeah, I get you. I think it's maybe more of like the venue, like we talked about
Athens.
Yeah. Athens had that really cool venue and stuff. Like, I think that has to influence you, especially when you're doing improvisational things, like just being in a thing like that. But I don't know about like the city itself. I mean, maybe they have some connection to some of these places, friends, kind of thing.
Yeah, true. Maybe they're in a better mood just because they.
Yeah, maybe. I love Athens, so I'm
this is my favorite. My favorite sandwich shop. I'm feeling good. So
it may not even be intentional.
Yeah. Well, I always like to think on that note. Like, I mean, we've talked about this before, and it's obviously true, but I always like to appreciate how much influence the crowd actually has on this. I think they're kind of feeling the energy in the room, and actually, it's really interesting because, there's no doubt that even though they can't see anybody, they can definitely feel just like the energy in the room, and so in that respect, like we all actually, I think, influence the way these sets end up sounding, like in a way that like a big way, I actually kind of think.
Yeah, totally. I think that's that's one big part that is lost in the soundboards, is you do lose that sort of third band member of the crowd.
Here's one from Marcy, who says the episode discussing set A was brilliant. This was a couple weeks ago. You're totally right to notice that it's probably the least favorite of the sets for most people, as it is much more abstract / less melody focused, or even beat focused for that matter. It's still excellent though. It's Autechre after all, and I would even rank it higher than the 2014 / 2015 sets. I thought this would be a good opportunity to just sort of temperature check with you. Like, how are you feeling like the 2022 Dash project stacks up to the other AE Live incarnations? For me, I think it's easily the best.
Yeah, I think at this point it's like, if it's not already the best to me, it's quickly becoming that. I've always like loved those 2014, 2015 sets. Like those are things I kind of just put on at work and stuff every now and then. And like I said, when these 2022 first came out, it was sort of so like nebulous and just dense, and we had come off of like just finishing doing the podcast the first time and all, so I was a little like sick and tired of it and everything. But now that I'm like digging in and everything, it's like it's like getting NTS all over again or something.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and yeah, I gotta be clear that I love the 2015 sets. Like, I love them. I actually am not even sure. I feel like people are just gonna hate me for this, but I'm not even sure I like the 1/6 sets very much. I have very mixed feelings about that kind of whole set. So I'm definitely putting.
We'll have to revisit those.
Yeah, we might have to revisit it. But I said before that I just am not crazy about like seated concert hall Autechre. I like dance floor Autechre, so I'm very happy that they're kind of back to this. But yeah, I guess I would have to revisit the 2015 ones to like fully decide. But I'm just loving this. Last one, I think, is from Rob, and this is another long one, but it's a good question. So Rob says, I've been listening to Chiastic Slide this morning, and it's prompting many questions about the growth and popularity of Autechre's live shows. What prompted this was the fact that both Chiastic Slide and the live show at Flex Vienna, a very iconic bootleg. I can't remember if we talked about that on the show or we were planning to before we then abruptly just decided to stop doing our kind of bootleg series.
I think it's the latter, yeah.
I just remember listening to it a million times, but are from roughly the same time in the 90s. I'm originally from the UK, but I've lived in Vienna since 2011 and have been to Flex a couple of times to see bands. Flex is a great venue, but has quite a limited capacity, maybe 1,000 at a push. Next year, they'll be playing at Gasometer, I don't know how to pronounce that, which has a capacity of over 4,000.
Wow.
This reminded me of the conversation that you both had recently about seeing AE live and how it compared to the 2015 show at the Social in Orlando. I was then reminded of recent articles on how the North American tour was expanded to include bigger venues due to increased demand, and how AE's London shows might be their biggest shows yet. Clearly, their stock has never been higher, despite not making any real attempt to become more commercial. In fact, you could argue the opposite. So why is this? I have a couple theories if you'll indulge me. One, COVID caused more people to listen to music at home, and perhaps this saw a growth in interest in artificial intelligence like artists. I don't know if Rob means like AI like ChatGPT or like the artificial intelligence series, like IDM type home listening, headphone listening stuff. Two, listening habits today see people listening to music on their headphones, and this lends itself well to AE. Three, the recent Oasis tour saw a lot of people being in the moment and not recording the concert on their phones. Perhaps the fact that you cannot use your phones anyway at AE shows is part of their appeal. Number four, the only way to hear new AE material is to go to the show. This is undermined by the fact that the soundboards are released though. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Really good observation, which is they do seem to be bigger than ever, despite, I think, releasing the most challenging music of their entire career. What is going on?
Yeah, that is crazy. I just looked up the capacity for the Social here in Orlando, where I saw them in 2015. It's only 400 people, and I don't think I'm not sure. I don't think it was sold out.
I feel like every show has been selling out on these recent tours. Quickly.
Yeah, because I mean the Atlanta shows, I got the tickets right away, but then you were going to go to the Montgomery, Alabama show, Birmingham, and I thought like, oh, maybe I could. How hard would it be for me to also make it? And it was like instantly already sold out. Tickets were like very expensive, so I just put that to bed pretty quickly. Yeah. But it is crazy because even in Atlanta, I don't know, like obviously Atlanta's a bigger city than Orlando, but like I was kind of really shocked at how much bigger the crowd was, and not only that, but like more into it and everything. And I don't know if that's just it being a bigger, artsier city, or if it is just like for some reason Autechre has gotten bigger than ever. I mean, like, did NTS do it? I know that got. I mean, as weird as that sounds, like I remember it getting like a decent amount of press and stuff. Pitchfork was talking about it and things, because they can't still just be riding off of like people who like Amber and Tri-Repute, like.
And you remember I was like struck by, and in fact, somebody was bitching at me. They didn't appreciate this comment on the Reddit, but I was struck by like the diversity of the fans at the Birmingham show in particular. And this was true in Atlanta too, but like there were a lot of young people. There were like people that I just would never have imagined being into Autechre, like people that looked a little bit more like ravers or like they looked a little bit more like bros to me. I don't mean that as a criticism. I was just like surprised. I was kind of expecting like, older millennial dads like me,
No, I mean, totally. That's exactly what it was in Orlando. It was like guys with beards that looked exactly like myself,
And I think it's extremely cool that I don't know, new people are discovering them. It seems like every day, and I don't know how to explain that because it does seem to defy all odds. I was reading something about, there's like the theory, what do they call it? Like the 1,000 fanboys theory, which is like, you can make a living doing anything as long as you can get like, you don't need a lot of fans, but if you have 1,000 like really dedicated fans, and I think Autechre is very much like there, like their fans are not just fans, like they've reached this new level of like obsession, and I don't know, that probably has something to do with it, but that can also be infectious when you see like a lot of people that passionate about something,
Yeah, I totally. I mean, I think like, things like NTS like that, I think that really does, like, if you have the willingness to sit through that, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but if you like are open to that, you're probably going to be very open to it and very into it. And then like, I mean, tell your friends about it. You talk on the internet, that all spreads. So like, I guess in one sense it makes sense why they've gotten bigger, but also like you don't expect like such challenging, quote unquote, music to become that. You would think it would just shrink more than anything,
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's just so interesting. I guess we could this may be something we should circle back to, but another thing is like it's just impressive how they've just sort of stayed doing what they do, like I was there. Okay, people don't remember and they won't believe it, but I was there and nobody liked Chorustus when it came out. Like nobody liked it. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't give less of a shit. That's what they wanted to do. And in fact, to this day, they still seem to be on the same like kind of line of exploration that started back with Chorustus as far as like different versions and iterations and stuff. And people kind of came around to them. I think people like just appreciate that they, they're just doing something, and people want to be along for that ride. And to your point, I think it's like, yeah, if you are somebody who makes it through the NTS sessions, if you make it through an entire sitting of all end, like you're a fan for life. You know what I mean? Like you're never
exactly.
There's some like dedication from both them and the fans that I think is really appealing. But wow, a long episode. I think there was a lot to talk about this one. An absolute highlight of, I think, not just this project, but Autechre in general. Feel like we did it justice?
Yeah, totally. So next time, remember, we're going to do our favorite albums of 2025. You can hear that by heading over to patreon.com/GONKCAST. And don't forget to tell us about your favorite album of the year. After that, another main episode on 2022 Dash. Going to get into set D. So share your thoughts. You can do that on Patreon or through email at gonkcastpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, help us out, subscribe, leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media. That's all, GONKCAST Pod, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.